All right, it is the top of the hour, and we're going to go ahead and get things kicked off. We'll start slow for this first 60 seconds for the late joiners that come in. So I am Chip Holbecky. I head up the consulting group here at Raymond, and I'm joined with Jim Ruxford and Tara Bollinger, both principals with our solutions group in a couple of different areas respectively. And we're here today to talk about disruption. Before we get going on the presentation, a couple of housekeeping things. Firstly, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them on the Q&A tab. That tab will be monitored. We'll answer some things in writing live. We will try to cover some of the things in the presentation, and for things we can't get to, we'll follow up later on if you've got specific questions or things that require longer follow-up. The recording will be available on YouTube and on Raymond.com. The Raymond channel on YouTube has quite a menu of previous presentations, so a lot of great content. We see people grab sound bites out of that to share with a friend or sometimes remember for themselves. So we think the entire hour is going to all be super valuable. We know there might be certain parts that click with certain folks, and so feel free to fast forward on YouTube if you need to. As we think about the topic of the day and we think about disruption, it reminds me back when my hair was less white and more blonde to being in college at macroeconomics and thinking about these arcane topics that impacted the economy. Some things that were less unusual, right? We understand supply and demand. We understand the availability of resources impacting economics. We understanding the availability of workers, interest rates, availability of capital. That stuff's not terribly new, but things that we never really thought of back then, or at least I didn't think of, is what are the instant impacts of internal political instability? What are the impacts of war? What are the impacts of disease or interconnectivity, or even changing attitudes in the workforce? And surely, even if those things happen, they wouldn't happen very quickly, right? These things would kind of marinate over the course of years, maybe decades, and there'd be lots of times to prepare and to adapt. And what we learned, probably we're learning before COVID, and especially now, is that none of these things are actually that far out. They are live disruptors. They are impacting us. They are changing, and they're changing fast. COVID was probably the fastest thing in this generation to show us that disruption. 9/11, of course, was another one that certainly changed the world instantly. But we wanted to spend some time today to really think about, okay, there's some disruptions you can't see coming. And you just have to be nimble and try to prepare yourself. Sometimes maybe be a little lucky to be in the right position. But there's other disruptions that we can anticipate. We know they're coming right now. There are things we have to talk about. There's a lot of different opinions around how to prepare for them. But I think the one thing we can all agree on is that, when COVID got us, it was kind of a surprise. Fool me once, shame on me, but fool me twice, shame on or fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me once. Oh, I'm really going backwards. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And as we look at these things, we're going to talk a little bit about what Jim and Tara do specifically. What I do specifically in my day job is work with companies in trouble, the insolvent world. And one of the ways we didn't title this, but we thought about it, is, do you want to talk to Jim and Tara today about preparation, or do you want to talk to me later when you didn't prepare? And that's really what we're going to get at here, is some key factors around cybersecurity involving Jim, and around supply chain and general business issues that Tara is going to chat about, that are all very foreseeable, right? There are things that are going on that are live right now, and shame on us if we don't prepare for them. And so this conversation today is really to try to bring into focus a lot of different issues, get us all thinking about them, and start conversations. It's not going to have all the answers. Many of the answers to these questions are specific to different types of industries, different companies, but we want to get these things out on the table, have a good, robust conversation. We encourage feedback. We love questions. So again, just reiterating, using that question and answer function for things that perhaps you think of that you want answered, perhaps you think of that are just great comments, because we recognize that there's a lot of great wisdom out in the audience as well, and we sure love to gather all that. So to get started, I think Jim and Tara, maybe you can each give a quick 30-second self-commercial, and then I will we'll launch into the seminar. Jim, you want to lead off?
Sure, I'll start. So I'm Jim Bruxford. I work with the Raymond Technology Solutions department here at Raymond, and been with the organization about 12 years. And we focus on managed services, managed security, a lot of project work from IT outsourcing. So from a solution standpoint, we're bringing a kind of a full service technology repertoire to the market space. And we've been doing this for a very long time, but just really trying to keep up and stay engaged with how the industry is moving. I mean, Chip, you've been talking a little bit about disruption and what we've been dealing with from a geopolitical standpoint, plus internal political standpoint. It's pretty significant, and I'm looking forward to talking more about that in a little bit.
Thanks, Jim. Tara?
Yeah, I'm Tara Bollinger. I'm a principal in our Toledo office, and I also, as Chip mentioned, am part of the solutions team. I specifically focus on our CFO solutions. So I do a range of things in the CFO area that can be fractional CFO. So really just being the CFO in the entirety for an organization, or we can do special projects. So a lot of times some companies just don't have the bandwidth for extra projects or just don't have the expertise. And we can come alongside and really help. And that's where we talk about the planning and the strategy. We'll get into even more today, but putting together a model, your 13-week cash flow, just how are we really making sure that we have a plan and sometimes even down to those policies and procedures. And we really pride ourselves in, we're not a cookie cutter. So what we do is really what makes the most sense and the most value add for you and in your organization. So we can have a wide variety of things, but our goal and our focus is always on giving you as good of information as you possibly can have and ability to make decisions and timely decisions.
Thanks, Tara. All right, we're going to start off with a focus on the cybersecurity side. Tara may jump in because there's actually some interesting crossover as we sort of balance efficiency and safety and all that. But to begin with, Jim, I wanted you to maybe think about laying the landscape for us. As I think about the landscape, I remember as in the weeks leading up to what we feared would be a Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then since the invasion, all sorts of warnings about a huge uptick in cyber attacks and cyber terrorism, and all sorts of things, all sorts of warnings been coming for a while. So maybe start us off with, have those things come to pass? Has the fears actually come to reality, and what are we seeing in terms of cyber attack and the world of it right now?
Yeah, thanks, Chip. So you're spot on. What we're seeing is that going in even to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that Russia was really a leader around the world when it came to cybersecurity issues. That they have heavy ties into different Russian operatives within the government, and it's highly funded, it's well organized, and it continues to be a real threat around the world. And so to have those warnings come out, it's a real and present danger. And it couldn't be communicated enough that this is something we have to sit up and take very serious attention to as far as how we manage the risk in our business, not only in the United States, but around the world. But honestly, the US is a primary target, has been for many, many years, and it continues to be that way. Russia isn't the only threat there. China has not as well organized, but they just have more of it, more resources from that standpoint. And then those are the two largest threats around the world, and then it just spreads out from there. But it continues to be something we have to take very, very seriously. And honestly, we have seen business in the industry starting to respond to that more so this year than in previous years. Every year it's grown a little bit more. So we're encouraged by that. And a lot of the business leaders are getting more engaged. They're investing more. In 2021, we alone saw a 50% uptick in what business was investing in cybersecurity. So we're encouraged by that, but it's not something you can be complacent about. We really have to continue to make this a forefront of how we approach business and how we approach risk management in general.
So, Jim, I heard you say that business owners are taking cybersecurity more seriously. They're worried about the disruption that can be caused to their business. They're worried about the embarrassment to their business, the impact on customers, maybe the impact upstream on vendors. Let's talk about how it happens, right? We have infrastructure. There was a day when you thought, okay, I bought McAfee or I bought Norton, I've downloaded it. Maybe I'm even good about updating it every month or every quarter. And so I clearly must be good, right? If I put the infrastructure in place, buy a couple programs, is that the end of it?
No, it really isn't, but you're spot on. I mean, the tools have been coming on very, very quickly to help. And a lot of the solutions that are being implemented today have automatic updates, and a lot of our businesses are relying on that. But it's really not enough. What we would say is the single most effective tool you can use is just educating your people, helping them understand what to look for, how to respond, and because that by far is the best and easiest way to get in. I mean, you can put in firewalls and software to be able to prevent things from happening, but it's really the bad actors are targeting your people, because honestly, it's an easier target. It's easier to get in by tricking a staff person than it is to try to hack through a firewall. And so that's what we're seeing. And then there comes the due diligence. So there's great tools out there to help educate the staff, but what we're seeing a lot of times is businesses are buying the software, they're buying the programs, they're really struggling with implementing it, and then also having the discipline to see it through and make it happen month in, month out, week in, week out. So we'll talk to a client and they'll say, yeah, we bought the end user security awareness training. Great, let's take a look at your reports. And we find out that if they're throwing a campaign out once a quarter, we're lucky. It's not rigid, it's not constant, and honestly, people learn by that constant repetition. And then we look at, well, how is your end users in taking the courses and completing the tests? And they're like at less than 50% participation. So they're not following through on and using and leveraging the tool to its fullest strength. And that's where we see a lot of the possible or opportunities for improvement. And so we're talking to businesses and saying, look, you're doing a lot of good things. You're thinking about it correctly. But if it's hard for you to implement the process and implement the discipline to do it well, let us do that for you, or let a third party come in and do that well. Maybe it's patching and updates. Maybe it's end user security awareness training. Maybe it's just watching your endpoint detect and respond portal to make sure that you're responding to this. Having the tools is one thing, but just making sure you're leveraging the value that you're paying for is a whole nother level that we're seeing is really slow to catch on yet, but it's coming. It's coming. So.
Jim, you talk about tools, and we've spent the time talking about the tools that the good guys use. One of the trainings that we frequently have here at Raymond centers around looking for these phishing emails where there's poor grammar, poor spelling. There's giveaways. It wasn't professional. It's not really from the bank. It's not really from this company or that company. And that's kind of old tech for the bad guys now, right? Talk about the ways that they're trying to get their emails to be more authentic and more genuine, and does just looking for grammar and inconsistencies still get us there?
Yeah, actually, you're spot on. There are organizations now that will do your editing. They'll set up to make sure that it has the dialect that you want, the spelling's correct. They'll proofread, they'll edit your messages, they'll put them together for you. I mean, there's services supporting the bad actors out there, including service desks, because a bad actor, we got to make sure our victims know how to pay their bill, right? So let's put a support desk out there. And I hate to say it, but they're actually quite effective. Talking to some business leaders that have been impacted, they go, it's terribly disappointing at how effective they are at their support desk to help you pay for a ransom, which we hope people aren't choosing to pay. We say that paying a ransom for a ransomware infraction would be the last resort whenever possible. If you plan ahead and you've got accurate backups, you can keep that from impacting you. But along that same line, it is tied to the processes that you use, and it's not always foolproof, Chip. I mean, I was talking to another business associate in it from another organization that about an instance where they knew of a business that was actually quite good at following their framework on security and managing risk management. And they'd been audited by a third party. They were passing all the audit. However, somehow they still got hit. They got a call one day that an old hard drive showed up on the internet and it had their financial data on it. And they're going, how could this happen? Well, their process was to take the hard drive and throw it in a bin and make sure that then they hired a third party company to come in, take the bin of hard drives and destroy it, give the certificate of authenticity of destroying the data. Turns out that the courier to take the hard drives to the service company, the driver was pulling hard drives out of the bin. So they were doing everything that they said they were doing, but they didn't lock the hard drives into a container to keep the courier from pulling one out here and there and selling them on the internet. So it is a matter of due diligence to make sure that you're following all of your processes, but then also thinking creatively on, is that still even enough?
Last thing I want to touch on this part of your presentation, Jim. Thinking about diagnostics, figuring out how a company is actually doing, trying to help look at what will happen if they are targeted. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about penetration testing, how that works, what you see, how you can educate after getting the results.
Yeah, so the testing that's done both from the internal and external standpoint is done by a third party to act like a bad actor, but they've got a white hat on, meaning they're there to help you find potential vulnerabilities. And so they're going to go through, and we provide this service as well, where we really approach it from the standpoint of where are the holes, where are the opportunities. And it becomes very, very interesting to see how you feel like you may have all of the fences up and appropriately, but to have somebody come in and say, you know what, we did get in, or we found this vulnerability, we were able to get this far. And it's quite revealing to be able to have a company come in and just make you a little bit more aware of whether or not you're doing all of your due diligence and dotting your I's, crossing your T's in all of those areas, because you can become very, very creative in how you actually get in the front door sometimes.
Jim, I took over a business in 2015 with about 100 or so users, and we did penetration testing, a fake phishing attack. Around half of the people fell for it. They reset their things. We did a campaign to raise awareness and educate, and we redid it 6 months later, and we found the exact same results, which was
Mm.
kind of daunting. I wonder what your experience has been with those sort of fake phishing attacks. What percentage, even in the good firms, are you still seeing where people are still clicking through those things?
Yeah, so we call that the click rate, and that's what comes with a lot of the programs that we do from an end user education. Anything greater than 10% click rate is something to be very, very concerned about, and to really make sure that you're doing your due diligence to get the education out, getting your staff educated. And you really want that down under 2-3% if you can, because if you think about it, you only really need one person to click on a phishing email, and now the bad actor's in and they can move horizontally through your network. So it is critical there. Again, that's kind of where I started, is that's the easiest way to get in. And so educating people is the easiest and probably least expensive method you can use to protect yourself in the long run.
All right, we're going to transition now and connect a little bit between you and Tara. I want to talk
Sure.
about cybersecurity and supply chain.
Mhm.
And I'm going to throw out a couple of things, and the two of you can both jump in on. But one of the things we do in the supply chain is we try to integrate everything, right? We want systems talking to each other. We have programs that determine when we need things, how long it takes to get there, trying to keep inventory low, but make sure you have it when you need it. And you have all this connectivity. But with that connectivity, you open the door, right? It's not just your IT anymore. It's now your vendor's IT. It might be 50 vendors' IT, and your customers, if you have throughput, they might be integrated up too. And so suddenly you've got all of these systems interrelated, which is very efficient, which makes Tara happy. It gives Jim hives because it, has all those security risks. So Tara, I wonder if you can start off for a second just to talk about the efficiencies with technology and supply chain, and then maybe the two of you can interact a little bit around how do you make sure commerce can still happen safely.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is if you even just go out and Google, what do I do about my supply chain issue? How do I fix it? There's this software program or that software program. There's all these different, here's your fix. And gosh, I wish there was an easy button. I wish I could say, go buy that software. Many of you, I'm sure, have known that just because you have a software program, it doesn't fix it. It certainly can make life easier. There's a lot of things that software can improve our lives, but we still have to give it good information. So we'll talk more about all of that, but that's the fix. That's how we're going to do it, is this software program. And from the CFO perspective, I absolutely am saying, yes, let's make it more efficient. Let's make sure that we're having good communication. And the key to making sure that everything is working the way it needs to work is through communication. And technology that allows us to have this open communication, it seems great. And then Jim, my IT guy, is saying, no, you can't do that. This is a risk. And where does it become the cost of doing business? What do we do about it, Jim?
Yeah, so you're spot on. I mean, a large part of it is when you start opening up the door to sharing data, you get very valuable, powerful solutions. But if you don't take the steps on the front end to build the security around the implementation, you create problems. So a large part of what we deal with is like with a vendor management program, and that is when you're tying and sharing data, how can you rest assured that the vendor is as serious about protecting your data as you are? And so there's programs to be able to try to get that assurance from all of these vendors, and it's not easy. It's not simple. It takes time and it slows things down. And but for the most part, it can be done if you do your due diligence on the front end and make sure that you understand what you're opening up, what you're sharing, how you're sharing it, and whether or not you've got that locked down and protected, and then also making sure that it doesn't spread as well. So if you don't have that internal expertise, by all means, there are people that do have that, and externally that can help you with that. So don't go into this with your tunnel vision. Make sure that you're doing your homework and investing in effectively moving forward in that area with the expertise to help make it a success.
Have you found some instances where those vendors are hesitant? That's not your information. I don't need to tell you that. We're fine. We have all those same controls.
Yes. So that's usually what happens, because from their standpoint, that's now the new method of doing business. So they want you as the customer to rest assured that they've done their due diligence. But unless they've done a SOC 2 audit, unless they've done a third-party review of their systems, it's pretty hard to really know whether they've done their due diligence or not. So I think that's one of the key things, is making sure that that third-party review of their systems is a part of what you ask for on the front end before you engage in a business relationship with them.
Jim, as you think about some of these systems, are all of the inventory control systems and all the integration all good, all bad, all have to be monitored? You know, what are the vulnerabilities that you see with some of these things?
Oh, Chip. You know, that is a big concern as you start dealing with software, because a lot of the bad actors understand that, for instance, if you can get into the application in the development side of the software, that you can fly undetected for a very long time. And then that software vendor is going to sell to their customers, and it proliferates across across their client base. So that's the real challenge, is making sure that you're, from the very beginning to distribution, that the software is protected, it's evaluated, it's scanned, and making sure that you're not pushing bad software out at the same time. But that comes through with the framework that they use from a development standpoint, and a third party should be able to come in and determine whether or not they're doing their due diligence to protect from that.
All right, we're going to continue transitioning more into Tara's world now a little bit. And again, some of these new disruptors that we're seeing, risks of interconnectivity, right? We've diversified, or we've offshored, but there's all sorts of risks here and there, right? There's labor disruptions here, labor disruptions there. There's political instability here and there. We're going to see the grain supply hit because of the war in Ukraine before much longer, among other things. So as we think about the supply chain, we probably are most familiar with it because that most important component that we can imagine, chips, are in short supply, and obviously
we can't have enough chips. You're absolutely right.
High demand, high cost. We're seeing that really shut down a lot of things. Talk for a second about this thought that the supply chain is broken, and maybe talk more about whether it's really a chain.
Yes, and we can't have enough chips, Chip, as you all cut that. No, so absolutely. The supply chain, the theory of a chain is, of course, it's a chain. It's links connected together. And if one single link is broken, the whole chain is broken. So supply chain is not really a chain. It's kind of more of a web. It's an intricate design, and every little piece can have minor impacts or major impacts. But when you think about the global supply chain and the way the world really was going global, there was many conversations happening at high levels, political levels, about, well, maybe we need to be more globalized. Maybe the world needs to focus on these areas, have better ability, either because of, financial resources, technology resources, just the people in that region are more experienced in certain areas. So China needs to keep technology, and Vietnam needs to continue to produce, clothing and shoes and things like that. that's the way the world maybe needs to start to be structured. That's the way we all can come together. And then COVID happened. And now this globalized world seems to be very uncertain. It never fully materialized, and for good or for bad. But at the point where now we're saying, okay, what does that mean? What does this big web of supply chain mean? And there's always been some thought of preparedness or preparation. We've always experienced hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, these terrible disasters that occur, but those disasters occur in one area. It's not anything that has impacted the entire world. Now we recognize there's impacts to our entire world that can occur that we weren't prepared for. We didn't understand how to prepare for. And even war can have a major global impact, but typically any one of those things stand alone is nothing that can break the entire supply chain or web, as we maybe should refer to it as. But we're at the point now where we have to say, well, there is enough impact that can occur. And how do we react? What do we need to do? And what's the appropriate way to react? And talking about the chip shortage, this is something that almost everyone has experienced in some fashion. And certainly if you're trying to get a new vehicle, you've certainly experienced it because it's a long lead time. You don't just go and buy one off the lot like you used to. And if you do, you're paying a lot more than what you used to. So it's a different shift now. And it was an unanticipated demand. The chips all went to supply computers and gaming systems and all of these things that, of course, always had some demand to them, but not near the demand that they were thought to have had until the pandemic happened. So the world reacts. And we react to that and we supply it. And then we have kind of this swinging effect. And what do we do? That's a hard, I would love to sit here and say, okay, this is what you do and this is how you fix it. And there you go. We can't know, but we can try to be prepared.
One thing that we're seeing too, Tara, along that line is you start getting creative with who your suppliers are. You have a need, and we need computers, we need servers, we need laptops. And we're seeing several suppliers out there going, hey, we can offer you this. And then we go and interface with them and find out they're all using the same provider up the chain. And so they're all, even though it seems like you have options, you really don't in many cases. So.
Yeah, Jim, that's a great point. And I think there's a lot of talk about onshoring. We offshored a lot at one point in time, and now there's talk about onshoring, but what does that mean? And what does that really look like? Yeah, now I'm going to use these 3 suppliers and they're all going to be onshore, but where are they geographically located? Are they all geographically close? Well, great, that makes sense. We can get it faster. What happens when they're all in the same infrastructure? They're all using the same tiered suppliers. They all have the same grid. They could be so geographically close that if there is a catastrophic earthquake or something, now they're all down. So there's certainly some thought process of global versus, domestic. And do we need to have a mixture much more than what we ever thought about?
So we've spent a lot of time in the last 5 minutes talking about the risks created by the disruptions in the supply web. We'll get rid of the chain lingo. What about opportunity? Is there opportunity where, and maybe there's more risk here too, where you might be a vendor to someone who they want to diversify, and so now they're going to take some business away. But is there an opportunity for people to look at stepping in and being the onshore solution or the diverse solution? And the corollary to that is, maybe they haven't been in the past because it just didn't work out cost-wise where customers were willing to pay what they needed to. Is their sensitivity changing, or do people want a diverse sourcing option without having to give any one person all of their business, still with the lowest possible cost? And is that possible?
There's always opportunity, and especially in times of risk and uncertainty, there's even greater opportunity. The difficult thing is capitalizing on that opportunity. How do you do that? What does that look like? what do we need to have in place to do it? And I think to your point too, Chip, they used to be, well, this is my main supplier and I'm going to buy 80 to 90% that I need from this main supplier. And now I'm the big player and I get the discounts and they kind of do what I tell them to do. That works great, except for when that supplier can't get what you need and they can't get it from whoever they're getting it from. And then you have this kind of domino effect. The thought is that some of that spreading out can make sense, but then you're absolutely right, Chip. What does that cost? What is the cost of buying less from more people? You got to imagine that's going to cost more. And that's part of what we're seeing in the world today is things are costing more and we have to pay more for things in order to get them. Many of us hope that's not a long-term solution to fix this problem, but it may cost more. But the key then becomes, how do you absorb greater cost? And I often argue, or maybe argue is too strong of a word, but I certainly would discuss that if you do not know your costs, it's difficult to control your costs. So it's really important that your cost accounting is in place, that you really understand, what are my inputs? What does it cost me to make this widget that I'm making? What does it cost me to provide this service? And how do I control those costs? And where are areas that I have control and areas that I don't have as much control? And how do I make sure I'm maintaining my margin? And great if you can sell it for more, and maybe you can temporarily, but how long is that going to sustain? So if you want to maintain the margin, and as Chip started our conversation, you either talk to me or you talk to Chip. So you pick where you want to go. And if you can't maintain that margin, you're not going to be able to maintain business. So it's really, really important that you have an understanding of those costs and where it makes sense to diversify, and where as a supplier it makes sense to diversify what you're making. But all of that made in just kind of a vacuum without really thinking through, what does this look like, putting together a model. On paper, we can't solve every single issue, but we certainly can have a plan. And I think that's where we need to be now, is to the drawing board, and what should we do and how do we react?
Yeah, Tara, I think that information is critical. You talk about it from the cost perspective, and we're all passionate about cost accounting. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Yay, cost accounting.
But it's more complicated now than it used to be, right? If you
Yes.
had a sole source, you know what your cost was for material. If you now have 3 sources, maybe your costing is different. You've got to figure out how to work your way through. But you're right, you have to understand the cost to keep the margin. You have to understand costs if you're going to adjust the pricing. And it's really tough to get pricing increases through if you don't have good information. It's hard enough when you've got a really good costing model and you can sit with customers and explain this is how it's happened, and maybe they have some corners that they can cut or whatnot, but at least they have the opportunity to see where you're at, and that you're not chiseling them for more profit. You're just sort of keeping it up. But talk about that for just a second, and maybe also talk about the importance of this information, not just in the inventory piece and the making sure making money piece, but how important is it to maintain your margins and your financial results, to keep your funding sources happy, keep capital happy, keep the bank happy, all those sorts of things.
Absolutely. As we talked, an opportunity, there's risk. There's always something out there that we need to make sure that we are focusing on. And it's so easy in these times of so much uncertainty to just be back to that tunnel vision. And oh my goodness, we can't get the supply that we need. Let's just find supply and we need to get it in here. Okay, but what did that reaction just happen? What now occurred? Now we've spent too much money. Now we're still not meeting our demands. Our margins are too low. And now the bank's calling, hey, what's going on? All of these things can happen if you're not careful. And that's where I always will push that we need to have good information. If you ever heard me talk, you've heard me say that everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information you have. But if you had better information, would you make better decisions? Absolutely. So let's make sure we had better information. Let's make real-time decisions, and let's make good decisions. And in order to do that, we have to have real-time information. We have to make sure that everything is working the way it needs to work. We need to make sure our cost accounting is up to date. And we really have some sort of a what if, what are we expecting to happen? And what do we do if this happens? And how do we make sure we're being as proactive as possible? In this ever changing environment, being reactive, it's too late. We're 15 steps down the line now, and we're still trying to react to something that happened 15 times ago. It just isn't going to work. It's not going to keep you going. So it's really important to have open conversations with the bank and with everyone when you're going through these difficult circumstances, but also making sure you have the right team in place. No one person can focus on all of those things at the same time. So having in the right team, bringing in the right team, really working through these, this is how you come out of it and come out of it stronger.
Terry, I want to switch over to the labor impact on the supply web, if for just a second. I want you to comment on three things: the risks that something like COVID will just shut down a major manufacturing city, like Shanghai, for example. I want to talk about the risk of just the overall labor shortage. There's been a lot of talk about that in general, right? Hard to find good help. But then also the risk in the changing attitude of the workforce. And that's something that doesn't get as much headline. It's not that you can't find bodies, it's just that, maybe those bodies either want to work from home or they want to work less, or, those sorts of things. So I wonder if you can comment on how you're seeing the supply chain being impacted and disrupted, and what can be done to mitigate or moderate that disruption from labor.
Yeah, and that's, we've talked about all of these things and all of this disruption, and we haven't talked about labor, and that is such a big piece of it. So we can't not. We all like to just hide from it, I suppose. But thinking of a major disruption in a major city, maybe that's not as difficult to understand, that we might have one area impacted. I talked before that we can have an earthquake, we can have a hurricane, where things occur in one major area. So sometimes we're a little bit better at having this mindset of we need to have some backups if one area is impacted. We can stomach that a little bit better. The difficult thing is you can manage that better when you aren't coming off of what we're coming off of today. So 2-3 years ago, we would have managed that much better than we can today. Today, we're in a position that we're still trying to get our heads above water. We're still reacting to those 15 things ago, and we're not really ready to handle more issues happening. So even in one area, especially in a major impactful area like China, that creates a lot of issues. And we might look at that and say, gosh, there's a bottleneck, we need to fix it. But the difficult thing is when you expose one bottleneck, you expose another. And where else is that impacting, and how does that go down the line? And everyone is short in labor. No one, I don't know of anyone that is exempt from having an impact of labor. And some of it is, of course, cost. And a lot of it is that changing attitude. And what does that mean? What does that look like? We can all sit here and say, we don't agree with it. You need to work, you need to be here, 50 hours a week, get your work done. Okay, then they're not going to work for you, is where that comes down to. So we really have to make sure, again, we get to communication, we're understanding what the workforce needs, we're talking to them about what we can offer. Sometimes it's not in wage, but it's in, what are the benefit packages? What are the things that you're able to provide for your employees that the competitor up the street is not able to provide? And maybe that's where you bring in some more technology, but with caution. You have Jim on your side, really making sure that you're setting yourself up well. But technology is a really great thing that can help us continue to move forward, get us better information, get it faster. All of those things are out there. But if we don't do them smart and we don't implement them well, and really we don't have the good plan going into them, they're not near as valuable as they could be or should be on the back end. We're just reacting, and as I started, just buying a software package that is going to fix our problem when we can't fix it. We just have to learn how to deal with it.
Yeah, we run into that quite often, where a business will buy the software looking to maybe offset the labor, and they find out that isn't the case. And it really comes down to, are you using the tools, and are you using the application to get the value that you don't have to hire the people for, and vice versa. So you're either investing in software to reduce your labor, or you're investing in labor and then not have as much software costs. And what we're finding in many cases is they're investing in both. And their labor costs are going up, their software costs are going up, and you're going, I don't think this is really being implemented very well. So let's take a step back and let's do an analysis and let's rethink this a little bit.
So as we think about disruptors, one of the things that we keep coming back to is talking about technology as a way to mitigate some of the problems. But talk about for just a second, both of you, if you would, how you see technology itself being a disruptor going forward. What are the changes you're seeing coming down the pike, positively or negatively, where we're seeing things being forced? And I'll give you, examples of things like in Europe with the data privacy laws. That was a technological change that has had an impact everywhere. It's had an impact here. It's had an impact all around the world. But what else are you seeing from a technology standpoint coming down the pike? And feel free to put on your fortune telling hat just a little bit. We're recording it, but we're not holding you to it.
Well, I can maybe start a little bit there. The investment, and obviously in artificial intelligence and leveraging the technology in that respect, it's all tied to the data. Several years ago, it was all about the data and getting the data collected, data warehousing. Well, now we have all the data. We've been collecting it. There's different solutions for drawing in all the different data. Now the investment is trying to pull meaning out of all of that data. And you got business analytics, you got artificial intelligence, you've got all of these sciences coming together right now. And to me, I see that as a real game changer, both in the cybersecurity area, but then also just in how you understand your business. You heard Tara talk about cost, knowing where your costs are. Well, what impact does the data tell you if you make these little tweaks? What's the impact on your cost analysis? What's the impact on your margins? We can do that now. We have the ability to implement that with the tools available to us today to really decipher what the data is telling us.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the difficult of all of it, is that we do have so much information. We have more information than we've ever had, but the key is, what do we do with it? And where is the value in information? And do we have the right information at the right time? Are we getting it in the right fashion that we know how to react with it? And, Chip kind of joked we're going to have our fortune telling hats on, and gosh, we do everything we can to try to just, where's our crystal ball? But the key is having good information that you have out there that you can say, okay, is this going the way we thought it was going to go? Jim gave the example of buying the software program to fix our labor issues. What are our benchmarks? Where is our strategy? Is this happening like we thought it was going to happen? And just because it's not doesn't make it wrong, but it gives us something to have. Okay, well, why is it different? That's where the key comes in, is why is this happening different than we thought? Maybe it's a good thing, but at least we have some confidence in it. So I think the key is, great, I love the technology and the data. Let's have as much as we possibly can, but we got to make sure that it's not a distraction and it's not a detriment to what we're doing. What do we do with it? How do we just, really hone that in, I think, is the key. And then how do we make sure we're doing it safely and we're not just exposing ourselves to other risks out there because we're so focused on just getting what we need and getting this software, solution. So you can't look at any one thing stand alone. You have to really look at the big picture, but it all comes back to just strategy and plan and really thinking through, which is difficult to do in times of disruption when you need to make fast decisions. But you can make fast decisions by having the right infrastructure in place. And let's all rewind 3 years ago and make sure we all have the right infrastructure in place so we're ready to face this pandemic. We're all fine. We can't do that but we can do it today, and we can make sure today that we're in the right spot. So tomorrow, when it does happen, we're in a much better position and we can make fast decisions.
That's a great segue into our conclusion, and maybe I'll give each of you just a minute or two to sort of boil down what we want the last commentary to be, and then we'll go into a couple of questions that we've got from some of our viewers. Tara, why don't you you can lead off, ladies first, and then Jim can back clean up.
Sounds good, Chip. Yeah, I mean, I think what we really need to focus on again is just that strategy and really making sure that we have the right things in place. And life would be so much easier if we could just, snap our fingers and here it is. We have it fixed. It's all together. No need to do anything about it. It's not the world we live in. It never was the world we lived in. And it certainly is not today. And we have to admit to ourselves now that it's never going to be again. The world is ever changing, regardless as to a pandemic or anything. It's ever changing. Technology is ever advancing. There's so many new opportunities out there. But how do you react fast enough? And how do you make sure you make the right decision? With opportunity, there's risk. So in making a bad decision, where does that place you? In having a plan in place does not guarantee a right decision. It does not guarantee that it's easy. It doesn't guarantee that it costs less. None of that is true. But what it does give you is that, what if this happens? What do I do? As I mentioned before, how do I know when I'm going off course? So even though maybe I thought this was an opportunity and I thought I could capitalize and I thought I was making right decisions, having my strategy and a model and something to really have that, is this passing the smell test? That gives me the ability to react and to pivot and not go so deep into it that now I can't come back out. So I think the key is really thinking through it and making sure that you hit the pause button as much as you can and make these decisions. And again, having the right team is critical to doing that. And then go forward and figure it out as you go, but you're not doing it blindly.
Over to you, Jim.
Yeah, so we have a lot of conversations with clients where we say, if you look at security, cybersecurity as a river, and you want to put a dam in the river to keep the data from flowing out of your organization, a lot of approaches are buy a piece of software and solve this problem. Well, that's like putting a pylon in the river. The water just runs around it. So if you really want to dam up the river, you put a plan together, you put the pylons in place, you start working your way across the river and you start closing off the dam. And that's where, similar to what Tara was saying, is we need a plan. And don't start with security and saying, okay, I'm just going to buy this package and this is the last thing that this vendor, recommended to me. But actually take a step back and look at managing your business from a risk management perspective. And it goes beyond just technology, but overall, how do you manage the risk in your organization completely? And are you bringing that into your decision-making process? And so there's framework in place where we walk businesses through, identifying what their crown jewels are. First of all, you got to know what you're going to protect. And then you start working up the chain of, now what are you going to do about that? And that involves disaster recovery, business continuity planning, a lot of things that don't come into the cybersecurity conversation, but actually have a very big impact on how you manage risk of your organization. And to follow that framework is what we would like to see more and more businesses follow and approach their day, every single day.
So that's a good segue into the first question we've got, and that is, talk about how the two of you combine to help clients figure out what they need, review the potential solutions, dealing with vendor management. How do we walk side by side with the client's teams as they look to enhance their technology safely?
Yeah, we kind of probably both, where do we start? It depends. But I think a lot of times where we want to start is making sure, tell us what you're doing today. Where are you at right now? What is the vendor management programs that you're using? How are you doing it? Is it manual process? That's fine. Let's talk through what's happening. Let's talk through what your goals are. And then let's help you decide what the best plan of action is. Do we need to make it, a less manual process? Do we need to refine the system that you're using? Do we need to help you find a software solution? Where do we need to go from there? And then, how do we make sure that all the right pieces are in place around it? So I think my starting point is certainly going to be that, where are we at and where do we want to be? And then we would bring in Jim and many others on the team to help make sure that all that infrastructure is in place the way it needs to be, or repairing issues that are already there.
Yeah, and I would add to that the vendor management program is just one part of your plan of risk management. And so we would put the overall plan together. And like Tara said, let's focus in on what we want to accomplish from a risk management standpoint, and put our priority list together, because not everybody that hasn't done this before can say, I want to do it all, and I want to do it all by next week. Well, that's a great idea, but there's resource involved with all of those decisions. And many businesses need to put a 1 to 2 year plan together to work their way to where they really want to be and sleep well at night. We get that, we understand that, and we help them through that.
Great. All right. I want to wrap up with just a couple of comments. This disruption that we're all dealing with, we know that it's real. It's out there. Most of us can't deal with it ourselves. Raymond is blessed. We've got a big technology group and a big solutions group. So we have the resources internally to really hammer these things. Even despite that, it's amazing the amount of attempted data intrusions we get. Something like 15,000 phishing emails in 90 days, 3,300 malware attempts, people trying to get in, almost 600 imposter emails trying to work their way through. Hearing Jim talk about the services out there that are designed to help the bad guys look more authentic, that are legit businesses, legit marketing teams, legit people that have the skills, it really, during the prep for this call, made me even think more about just how big business this is out there. As I travel abroad, some of the other countries in the world actually have reserves for ransomware. Just like we have reserves for bad debt, or reserves for depreciation, reserves for old inventory. They just expect cyber intrusion, and so they have a loss booked on the books. So I think we should not be surprised when these days come. We should be prepared. Thinking about the things Tara talked about, I just kept hearing good information, good information, good information. Having good information so we can plan, whether that's good information around costing, around labor, around how we could pivot here or there, and then really the two of them coming together to look closely at how we can holistically balance efficiency and security, being really critical. And so the takeaways, for me here is that hopefully we've talked about some things that have been of interest. We've not just run around saying the sky is falling. It is. I guess that's my line more than the insolvency world. But there's trouble out there, right? There's disruption. These are just two areas of this disruption. Shouldn't be a surprise when it comes along. And it's time to make sure that folks are set up and ready to deal with it. We found out during COVID that we do have the ability to pivot and to thrive. And certainly some businesses were just in the right spot. Other businesses worked hard to get themselves in the right spot. This is more of that. This is having these conversations, and Jim and Tara are certainly people who can have these conversations. Many Raymond advisors can, and can help bring in the right individuals as we need to make sure that, again, when these things come along, we're not surprised. We're not caught short. We're not wondering where this all came from. we know the bad actors are out there. We know disruption is out there. We know all these economic disruption factors that we used to think were theoretical are unfortunately a little less theoretical. So really appreciate Jim and Tara and all of your insight. Appreciate the audience today. They would love to talk more with any of you. So I think the attachments and the information has got all the contact info and bios, and maybe a few other people from the firm are listed as well in case somebody beats you to Jim and Tara. So feel free to use them. Again, this little recording will be on YouTube and the Raymond website, and happy to interact with folks. So again, thanks everybody, and have a fantastic afternoon.